Hello and welcome to a video talking about America's favourite family. Or, maybe they were the favourite family 20 years ago? I'm not sure who still cares about The Simpsons.
Do the Homer shake.
The Simpsons, a show that I share a name with and have heard no end of jokes about in my entire damn life, and a show that has gone on for so long that at this point it's basically done it all, including jumping the shark and abandoning all relevancy / good narrative in the favour of becoming the equivalent of popcorn pop culture, there but not really fulfilling at all, and certainly something you shouldn't be eating as a full meal. And that nature of having done it all is such a ubiquitous meme of The Simpsons that it literally has a repetitive meme about it that has entered the permanent lexicon of humanity. The old classic, The Simpsons did it, for referring to when anything from anywhere does something that has some similarity to a Simpsons episode, including real-life events. Of course, it was epitomised by South Park in their episode The Simpsons Already Did It, and we'll talk about that show in more depth at some other date in the far, far future. But let's get back on track here. Because I was thinking the other day, while I was going about my daily life of, currently downing painkillers like crazy for the impacting wisdom tooth that I had that needs to come out and is currently out, which is why I'm talking a little weirdly, because this side of my face is, feeling strange right now. I was thinking, hang on, is there a Simpsons episode about trans people? I couldn't think of a single one in all my decades of watching the show, and trust me, when a trans episode of a show does occur, it absolutely sticks in the old noggin. Initially, I wrote this off as a delirium from a mixture of that pain and drugs I just mentioned I'm still going through, because Simpsons must have a trans episode. It's been running for 34 seasons over 30 decades, with thousands and thousands of characters. It would be madness for them to have not done one at least once. So I pushed it aside. But it wouldn't go away. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and how maybe I've just been tricked into thinking that they did cover it by the vast plenitude of content that they offer. That maybe other people were just in the same boat that I was, convinced that there must be a trans episode, that there must be trans characters, that there must be at least some transness within the show. So today I want to actually answer that burning question. The question of where is the trans stuff in The Simpsons? To start with here, I want to make it clear that I am not questioning the inclusion of queerness within The Simpsons, because that has been evidently true and existing in many ways. There are multiple gay-centric episodes, from Homer's Phobia to Free Gays of the Condo to Flaming Moe's to There's Something About Marrying, which we will come full circle back round to later. Trust me, that episode deserves a special mention for the narrative that it presents. And we even have a drag queen episode in Working Mum, which happened 5 years ago in season 30. Jesus Christ. There's just so much of this bloody show. And there are many queer characters, including full-time characters that exist within multiple episodes, like Patty Bouvier, Waylon Smithers Jr., Kodos, who's like an alien, so that features in its own weird little bubble of not really actually being queer, because in their culture identities, that might not be seen in the same sense. Like, aliens having that kind of sexuality doesn't necessarily mean they're queer. I'll make a video talking about that, the usage of robots and aliens to present gender and sexual variances in ways that are not too close to home to scare the cis-straights, in another video. Looking at you, Asari from Mass Effect, and, actually many others. Now, I want to address the Waylon Smithers of it all here as well, because that is one of those cases where people might pull up moments of them buying estrogen bottles for a friend, apparently, when we see his file in Frink Gets Testy that mentions he will soon be Wanda.
Alright, let me recheck it. Rechecking, put upon side. Hi, Vic. Rechecking. Here we are. Simpson B.
But this is the case of there being no clear definitive moment of them being transgender, and far more often they fulfill a gay stereotype character who is into drag. What I'm trying to get at here is that quite naturally, for a show that has gone on for this long, and attempted to at least break some ground in portraying gay people in the early years, there are a lot of queer characters, and queer moments, and queer episodes that one can find. But we're not here to talk about queerness. The question wasn't, are there queer people in The Simpsons? We're here to talk exclusively about transness. So where is it? Where are you hiding the transness, Simpsons? Well, I want to define trans representation into 3 separate categories, so that I can divide this essay into chapters and make my life slightly easier. I don't know why I'm explaining the process to you, but I've committed at this point to this bit. I don't have to stop it. Firstly, there are trans episodes, entire pieces of media that are centered around a trans issue and involve one or multiple trans characters featured throughout. For a recent example of something I covered that did this, you can look at Quagmire's dad in Family Guy. This makes the trans conversation or topic the main focus, and by doing so it gives it the most exposure, which can be positive or negative, but oftentimes, due to the writing of it, you can find positive moments in the negativity or negative moments in the positivity. One of my favourite things to do for giving examples of how we can improve on our representation. Secondly, we have trans characters. People who exist in multiple circumstances as trans, either within one episode or across multiple episodes. They might not be the person of an episode, but they give us an insight into trans representation by virtue of existing on the periphery and have opportunities for showing more humanization and nuance through their continuing appearances. A great example of this that I recently covered as well is Twin Peaks and Denise Bryson, who is never the foundation of any episode, but does persistently exist as transgender and gives us an insight into that part of their identity, by weaving through 3 episodes of the story. Finally, we have the trans gags and throwaways, where a trans character exists for the sole purpose of a single line or scene, wherein the point of their appearance is to emphasize or make a comment before vanishing out of the show again. Due to the briefness of these moments, they hold the most potential for portraying a trans person as a joke or stereotype because of the need to establish their identity and also make some statement about it all within a short window of time. It offers the least amount of inclusivity, and honestly multiple throwaway moments like this are far more harmful and annoying than a single trans episode that does poorly, because of that aforementioned possibility to find positivity in it. It's hard to find positivity when the show doesn't give us the time of day to discover or discuss it. A show that does this that I have once again covered already is How I Met Your Mother, featuring multiple scenes of trans people existing in the nightmare visions of Ted Mosby, or being used as a joke piece like the Who's Hot and Who's Scott game, where they review a group of women to try and transvestigate the trans woman from the rest.
Hey, Barney, there's a bunch of models in the lobby, and the gossip is one of them is really a dude. You want to play Who's Hot and Who's Scott?
And I just want to take a second to talk about how incredible it is to be able to reference multiple videos of my stuff in another video for trans issues. It's like that meme of Obama putting a medal on himself. Like, hey, go me, I've created my own reference pieces. But those are the 3 ways I want you to have in mind going into the Simpsons analysis. Before we get into it fully, I want to briefly touch upon something that will come up from someone in a comment, and that is very similar to the Waylon Smithers situation of characters who are hinted at as maybe transgender if you squint hard enough and are really lenient with the headcanon. A great example of this is Wallace Wilkes John, a neighbour of the Simpsons in PayPal, who is a woman with a deep voice, which has led to assumptions that she is transgender because of that. Which is silly, because cis women can have a deep voice.
Now Wallace will once again withdraw into melancholia.
Birth, school, work, death, worth, drool, shirk, breath, mirth, cruel, quirk, meth.
If it's not literally confirmed, all we are doing is playing the game of I guess they could be trans, and I don't play those games too much anymore. I appreciate that for many people, headcanons are the only way to get the representation that we want, that we have to hunt for clues and hints to try to get something, but I'm not going to reward a creator or clap them on the back for the work done by fans to put in the representation that they didn't confirm themselves. That's not how this works. Either you did the assignment, or you didn't. See, what I did here, I tricked you. I tricked you, and you fell for it. Because here's the truth. I can't divide the Simpsons representation into these three categories that I've established and make a chapter out each one, because, surprise, surprise, Simpsons does not have a transgender episode. In 748 episodes, there has not been a single one that focuses on trans issues, that has at its core a trans topic or trans person. Now, admittedly, they might release one before the end of the current season, or they might release one in a future season, but for right now, it looks like the one thing that The Simpsons didn't already do is have a trans episode, or have a trans character who exists in some longer format. Guess they didn't predict that one, huh? I was right, though. They didn't have one. I feel validated, and a little upset, because it does feel insane that such a thing could occur. I understand wanting to avoid topics that might seem risky, or that might be difficult for the audience, or might annoy your conservative ghoul boss Rupert Murdoch, or might annoy your current tame boss Disney, but other shows have covered this by this point. And The Simpsons has done episodes on other things that at the time were in the same space that transgender issues have been in for the past decade. It's kind of amazing how late to the party The Simpsons are on this one. Because being late would have been releasing a trans episode 3 to 4 years ago, when they also released a drag queen episode. Featuring RuPaul, because every drag queen episode has to have RuPaul in it somewhere, I guess. That's like a requirement of releasing a drag episode. RuPaul's like, you gotta put me in there. Put me in there. Or you won't be drag enough. This is ultimately a short chapter for analysis because there is nothing here to analyse. Its complete absence, though, is absolutely something that will play into my conclusion and into my greater point down the line, but for right now, all I can truly say is, thank you, next. Here we get to the real meat of this video essay, the point where at least I can provide some examples of The Simpsons having trans people exist in some way, at least. It's unfortunate that they don't really get to exist as people, but I guess Simpsons has more in common with How I Met Your Mother than Family Guy in that regard, which feels wild to say that Family Guy did representation better, but there you go. Crucify me now in the comments. There are 4 confirmed canon trans characters. That's doing a lot of work to say confirmed canon, technically, but within the show, and 1 awkward character who exists in this horrific space of being trans-adjacent in all the worst ways, considering our current state of anti-trans rhetoric and bills. And let's go through them one by one, so we can get a sense of where trans people stand in the writing and narrative of this wholesome family show, who presents to us a more positive cartoon that isn't trying to offend sensibilities, and is trying to be sympathetic and universal in its approach. Yes, I am saying all of that as a setup for getting it punched down. You can already feel the dread of where this is going, I'm hoping. So our first transgender character is Clara Hossenthrauen, or McBabe, from the popular Arnold Schwarzenegger parody of McBain. Oh, you might be saying, is that character trans? They don't really do or say anything that indicates that in the small part they have at the start of Oh Brother Where Art Thou, Season 2 Episode 15.
You certainly broke up that meeting.
Right now, I'm thinking about holding another meeting in bed.
Oh, McBain.
And here is why you might be thinking such a thing. Because it isn't confirmed here. And before this starts seeming like I've tricked you once again and I'm covering a character who isn't actually canonically trans as a way of pulling a fast one on you, they are canonically so, because of the 2001 Simpsons Mania cards, a follow-up to the original Skybox Simpsons collectible cards from 1994, which is the year I was born because this show is old as fuck. In these cards, and please bear with me because I know that right now you might be thinking that I've lost my mind because I'm using trading cards that nobody owns or even knows anymore to showcase trans characters in The Simpsons, we have a McBabe or Clara Hossenthrauen card, and right on front of it is the revelation that she has a secret past, and that she used to be the actor Roy Malloy. I wanted to bring her up first because this isn't even a bit in the show. This is a fact that nobody would know unless you were digging so deeply into random old Simpsons memorabilia like I am. I can't even use Clara to try and clarify some of the feelings from the show towards representation, because it might as well be a non-entity, much like the trans episodes or substantial trans characters. Come on. You can't hold up a card and go, but look at from this card. She's trans. Therefore, we stand. Because who owns those cards? Okay. Let's get back to the show and back to trans characters that, say they are trans in dialogue, so we actually have, visual confirmation of it. Now, our next character is the infamous cruel judge Constance Harm, who first appeared in The Parent Rap, and has gone on to have many more appearances since then. She is a Judge Judy-esque parody, a tough-as-nails and hard-on-criminals kind of person, who is basically swapped in for the more jovial Judge Snyder when he has gone on vacation. Now, you might be asking, well, hang on, you said this chapter is for trans side bits or gags, and yet you just confirmed that she appears multiple times. Are you making a bad video essay again? And while I have been guilty of that many, many times, the reason that Constance Harm belongs here is because while she has appeared as the no-nonsense judge character in multiple situations, the only time we get any sense of her trans past or her trans identity is a single throwaway line near the end of The Parent Rap. When in response to Bart asking to be able to say something in defense of his parents, she relents to this unorthodox demand because the look he has reminds her when she was a little boy. To which Snake, the perennial criminal, responds with, "Did she say she used to be a dude?" And then everybody moves on because it's a one-off gag and her trans identity plays no part in the episode's storyline at all.
Please, Your Honor.
Oh, I can't resist that look. You remind me of me, when I was a little boy.
Did she say she used to be a dude?
Just, throw it out there as a little whoop surprise and it never comes up again. Now, you see the difficulty here with this one, because technically this is a trans character. She is canonically transgender according to that throwaway line, and openly admits such through a jokey bit that we just mentioned. But it's hard to consider it as long-term representation when, if you blink and miss that line, then you would never have a chance of knowing it about her. I mean, I'm not surprised that I forgot she was transgender, and I imagine that many people viewing this also had no idea. And that's not our fault, because Simpsons didn't want to hang around trans identity. They didn't want to include it in greater depth within their episodes, something that they have kept up for 20 seasons after Constance Harm debuted. And that point, about it being mentioned but barely relevant, and never really built upon, comes into play with our third transgender character, that of Brunella Pommelhorst, who falls a little bit into the maybe category thanks to a few elements. Yet again, you might have no idea whom I'm talking about, a persistent theme when we are discussing these characters who do not fill a main role or stand out to the audience in any major way. Brunella is a tough-as-nails gym teacher at Springfield Elementary, noted for her distinctly masculine energy and vibe that she brings as a woman. Or he. It's not really clear exactly what the correct terms are in the situation, because as we discover in My Fair Laddie, she, or he, or still she, is leaving the school for their gender reassignment surgery, and will be returning according to Principal Skinner as Mr. Pommelhorst.
This is very emotional for me. I am taking a leave of absence. I will return in the fall as Mr. Pommelhorst, your new shop teacher.
We're telling you children now so you can adjust and not make jokes.
Looks like there'll be some new wood in shop class.
Precisely the type of wordplay I seek to discourage. New wood.
However, next time we see her or him or them in Mums I'd Like to Forget, they are still presenting as a woman and referred to exactly the same, and they continue to be called Miss Pommelhorst or Brunella throughout the rest of the episodes they appear in. There are quite a few similarities between Constance Harm and Brunella Pommelhorst, not least that they are these strict disciplinary characters. Like, I don't know, is every trans person in the eyes of the Simpsons some kind of hardcore, stern, or severe personality? Because that feels like a weird stereotype. The more relevant similarities to this conversation are the ways in which both are characters who appear multiple times, who have a single gag, comment, or joke that establishes them as transgender, but it never has any impact on anything, and might as well have not been included for all the representation it gives us. It feels as if the joke here is that Brunella is masculine, and therefore, of course, they would transition to a man, Because butch women would do that, right? Or would feel encouraged to do such a thing. Oh. That's like the TERF rhetoric stuff. You know, the one that's like, oh, all these women are being convinced, like these poor lesbians are being convinced into turning into men, because it's better to be a man than to be a lesbian, and like, that's way worse now that I think about it in such terms. Especially considering the episode There's Something About Marrying, which is rushing towards us like the train lights at the end of the tunnel. This is one of those tricky jokes where the question of what are we as an audience meant to be laughing at or meant to be thinking from this, what are the writers and the directors pointing us towards with this bit, and the conclusion of that can be quite subjective. Purely based on the fact that it doesn't turn into anything, and it does truly exist as just that comment, it's hard not to feel as if the transness is used for shock value, or for a quick laugh. Which isn't very comfortable, and really does remind me of How I Met Your Mother, as I mentioned earlier. Our final trans character is that of Stan Lorena. Jesus Christ. A character who appears in Season 24's episode Gorgeous Grandpa, when the family finds out that Abe Simpson used to be a rather flamboyant wrestler, and Marge suspects that he might be gay because he, does effeminate stuff, I suppose. Look, the interpretation of people's expression into gender identity is one of those things that Simpsons gets completely fucked, like some confused old person who doesn't understand all these new fad stuff, like women wearing pants or men putting on makeup, and we get a minor confrontation between Marge and Bart over the fact that she is believing Abe might be gay because it's a fad at the moment, to which she responds that such a concept is silly. She's just going to use that fact to get one up over Helen Lovejoy, the wife of the town pastor, who always goes on apparently about her he-she cousin. We then meet this he-she cousin, Stan Lorena. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Right. Later on, they meet this he-she cousin, Stan Lorena, as Helen is taking her to go and get her hormone shots. And then that's her out of the show. It's great to see where we stand in this bit, as some kind of trophy animal for cis people to drag around and use to boost their own profiles, I guess. Something that could be a good commentary towards that attitude, because that is a toxic way of expressing such a thing, but The Simpsons never really counters that toxicity, especially in regards to Stan Lorena. We never get to see her comment on it, we don't get to see her say anything at all. We don't see her outside of that context. We don't see her express distaste with such a thing. What are we doing here, Simpsons? Are we, trans people, just props for your characters to have their gay episodes around? Is that all trans people are? A minor feature in the queer stories that exist in the narrative? The answer might surprise you, because it is kind of yes. Like Mother Shabooboo or Francine, a character that gets mentioned in an offhanded comment in Lisa's first word as Homer's cousin who started out as Frank Simpson, and is used as an emphasis for how children can be damaged by sleeping with their parents till they are 21. As Francine did this, and is now trans and in a cult, I guess. So I suppose that's actually another canon trans character, so 5 characters? Feels like we're really scrabbling for the bottom of the barrel here, and none of them are good representation. They all just emphasize the worst possible points. And that brings us quite nicely to our big episode conversation. The one, the only, there's something about marrying. Now, this episode is the one that a lot of people bring up when you mention a trans character in The Simpsons, and a trans narrative. And the problem is that bringing it up is ridiculous, because not only is it neither of those two things, it's actually incredibly transphobic in the positioning of it, in a way that almost any trans person can recognise right now as being specifically used to target us. What do I mean? Well, let's talk about the episode. See, Springfield decides to legalise gay marriage, as a way of bringing in tourism, which leads to Homer becoming a gay marrier, someone who marries gays, as it pays $200 per marriage. Capitalism, baby. You can be gay if it pay. And this devolves into its own weird side story of Homer desperately marrying anything to anything because he wants to make cash still, which, slippery slope joke aside, not what we are focusing on. because the other storyline is the one about Patty coming out to her sister, and Marge struggling to accept that Patty is a lesbian, and is going to marry a woman. Specifically, Veronica, a pro golfer.
This is my fiancée, Veronica.
It's a pleasure to meet you all.
So, Veronica, what do you do?
I'm a pro golfer.
No surprises there.
There is a whole narrative flow about Marge learning to be okay with something that she feels is dumped on her without being able to adjust to it over time, but all of this gets weirdly sidetracked as a narrative when Marge discovers that Veronica has the toilet seat up and is shaving and is singing "Dude Looks Like a Lady" because subtlety is an art The Simpsons lost a long time ago. This leads Marge to the conclusion that Veronica must be a man, because those are all male things, right? The signs are all there. You know, ignoring the fact that cis women also shave their face too, and as it currently stands, this is not necessarily a transphobic episode yet. Well, I mean, Marge is kind of being a bigot, but that bigotry is overshadowed by her weird enjoyment at the idea that her sister is getting something that she didn't register for in the wedding. Like, she's happy that Patty doesn't know something about her spouse.
She's a man. Looks like Patty's gonna get something she didn't register for.
Like I said, at this point, the big discovery could be that Veronica is a trans woman, and that Patty knows, and Marge is going to look pretty damn silly, but it isn't where this is going. Though, you know, in an alternate timeline, The Simpsons manages to turn this into a winning episode, rather than where it actually is going. Now, see, Marge goes to the wedding, making Patty think that her sister is finally coming round to the whole lesbian thing, and a happy moment for Patty, while Marge deals with the knowledge that she needs to tell Patty that she's actually marrying a guy. And so Marge leaps up and reveals the Adam apple that was hiding beneath some skin tape by ripping it off Veronica.
Veronica is a man.
Look at the size of that Adam's apple!
Oh, a big shocker. Whoa! Even though, biologically speaking, it is also possible for cis women to have Adam's apples. And also, you know, Veronica could still just be a trans woman and Patty could be fine with that. So, if that was the case, this would look really bad for Marge. But remember, this is The Simpsons. They are, at the end of the day, kinda meant to be on the right side, eventually. So we discover from Veronica that they are actually really a guy called Leslie, who lied to get their way into the women's golfing scene so they could win, and then lied to Patty because they fell in love with her. And Leslie himself makes it patently clear to us in his speech that he is not a trans woman. That Patty did not consent to or know about this, and so Patty tells him, hell no, she won't marry him. She's into girls, which everyone responds to by clapping.
Hell no, I like girls. Marge, thank you for accepting me for who I am.
Big celebration, Marge learns to accept the lesbians, and Patty doesn't get tricked into marrying a guy. Now, with that clarified, do you see the elements of transphobia that I mentioned, especially in the way that many people registered this as the trans episode, regardless of Leslie making it clear that they are a guy doing all the things that right-wing and anti-trans pundits are currently fear-mongering that the trans movement is covering for. This allowing of men to get into women's sports and steal medals for them with their superior whatever stuff people use for that particular sport, and lying to lesbians to force them into sleeping with men. It's literally part and parcel of the very stuff that sits behind the current wave of trans panic. Even without a trans woman involved at all, it makes it clear that a couple of things, shaving and Adam's apples, are the defining way for Marge to prove that this is a man. And it also fuels the fire that even though Leslie is a self-proclaimed man, what if these people are hiding among the transes, using the movement to do their nefarious deeds? How can you trust any of them when any of them could be a Leslie? This is really, really bad. Honestly, the fact that this is the closest that The Simpsons gets to a trans episode is embarrassing, and really feeds into that message that I want to reiterate here, that attempting to be inclusive and failing is better than being absent and using anti-trans rhetoric in an adjacent fashion. Family Guy was much better than this. Jesus, I can't believe that I'm saying this again, but, you know, take the crown from Family Guy for worst trans moment I've seen in TV, and The Simpsons can have it. Well done, you guys, you know, Disney or Fox or whoever is in charge of the show right now. You did it. You made a worse trans show than Family Guy. Family Guy actually got better later on, which we'll talk about later. Before we move on to talking about who to blame for all of this, I want to quickly address another element that I assume someone will mention, and by doing so I can then say, "Watch the video," when people comment about it. The few moments when we see a time skip into one of the future events that is a character that we are aware of as trans. Think the Milhouse and Bart relationship picture that gets posted by someone once every couple of months for trans Twitter to lose their mind over for a bit, or the episode where we find out from Lisa that Martin Prince changed his name to Marsha Princess and has had a sex change operation. In both of these cases, I understand people taking this as a sign that these effeminate characters were actually just eggs the whole time. And I totally get it, because I mean, it tracks, and it makes sense, especially for the trans community, and our desperation to push for that shit when a show is refusing to give us any serious commitments. But all of these future scenes are barely canon. In fact, they constantly contradict one another, and are about as real within the Simpsons narrative as fanfiction. Your homebrew headcanon is about as valid as this stuff, which varies from writer to writer depending on the episode, and what joke they thought would be worth making this time at a character's expense. So, I didn't really include either of those because it's kinda impossible to do so in a serious manner. It doesn't count, and I'm not giving Simpsons any gold stars for more one-off gags about bullied boys growing into women in the made-up alternative timeline future. You gotta work harder than this to get a tick from me here. All of this answering of that initial question, the question of where are the trans stuff in The Simpsons, leads us to this new question, now that we know the dire state of the trans stuff in this show, which is, who is to blame for this? In a show like The Simpsons, which has many showrunners and many writers and many influencers on it, that is actually really hard to answer. It would be easy to say that it must be because of Fox and Murdoch, but they haven't owned The Simpsons in a while now. It's been Disney for the past 4 years. So maybe it's Fox and Disney who are at fault for this one. Combined, they're clamping down on the attempts by the writers to write trans narratives into their show because the studios are afraid that it might impact upon them in some way, or it might hurt the way or the status that they've put The Simpsons into in their branding. But that doesn't make sense either, because Family Guy is produced by the same company, and they went well into trans episodes, and plenty of other Disney and Fox shows have included trans narratives of all stripes. So it isn't the production company that can be seen as the sole blame. Is it the creators and developers then? Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, Sam Simon? Well, Matt Groening does have another bad trans episode in a show that was helmed by him, specifically Ben-Hur in Futurama, which I covered in this video here. It's not one of my best video essays, and certainly one that I am thinking of redoing at some point, but it has similar themes almost to the Something About Marrying, being about a male robot going into the female robot sport and stealing medals from them, while also tricking someone into dating them without their knowledge of who they really are. Why does that keep happening, Matt? What the fuck is going on, dude? God, one could argue that it's maybe a blessing that you didn't do a trans episode in The Simpsons, and many people have argued such a thing, but I'll get more into that in the conclusion about why that's not the case. Matt is still a consultant and executive producer for the show, although it's not very clear from interviews exactly how much power he exercises over what gets made, that being mostly left up to the showrunner, which has changed hands so many times, though most of the egregious trans gags happened under the stewardship of Al Jean. Is it Al Jean's fault then? Maybe, but he left last year, and also he didn't do the show running before season 13. He has certainly been linked by a lot of people to the declining quality of the show over that 20-season stint, But that doesn't necessarily explain it. It might explain why it hasn't existed so far, but, you know, the new showrunner could have done something. Barely any interviews or conversations even really touch on the lack of transness. It makes it hard to specifically hone in on a central problem for why this has kept happening. But a core one that I think makes a lot of sense is that the show doesn't have any trans writers or trans people involved in the process at a higher level of creating it. A lack of diverse voices, especially in that area, is going to naturally lead to difficulty of including trans stuff, of writing it. They have gay writers who have been involved in the gay episodes that we mentioned, but not really any trans stuff. Much like the political system, this one might just be a failure at every single level, across multiple different inputs, and not the fault of one person or one easily fixed flaw. I know that's not the answer people ever want. It's always far easier to get mad at a direct target, but it's the one that I have arrived at from the research I've done. We can't blame The Simpsons and its lack of transness on any particular person. It's a more universal issue. And so all this brings us here, to the end, to the conclusion where I am forced to tie together all these disparate threads into answering that big question looming over this entire video essay. Trans? Simpsons? And it's a difficult one to answer. At its core, The Simpsons represents a failure in trans representation. A failure at almost every possible level, and to a degree that it's worse than if they never tried at all. See, while we have proved that conclusively The Simpsons do in fact have trans characters, or characters who have mentioned at least once that they are in fact trans, or whose transness is used to emphasize a point in a gay episode, or whose transness exists as a silly little surprise fact on a card series from the early 2000s, none of that by itself is a good thing. Nor is it trans representation. The very existence of a trans person is not enough for it to be of any kind of quality, good or bad, for actively showcasing a characterization of the community. At the most, what it can be in a comedy show is a gag, when they have to establish the transness in the same breath, they link it to some kind of joke or bit around the person, which we see repeated in the characters from The Simpsons. And does remind me so much, as I said before, about how trans people feature in How I Met Your Mother.
You don't buy beer, you rent it. Am I right?
This is the men's room.
I know. I'm a dude.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
I love you.
I used to be a dude.
I'll be back in 1 second.
I bet he's going to the urinal. Yeah, I remember when I had a penis.
Well, I'd say you got a pretty long wait.
That's sweet. It would be sweeter if you hadn't thought I was a tranny before, but...
Compare this to other shows that include trans people to a degree that they feature in some larger part within a single episode, or even across multiple episodes, and you see the advantage of that appearance. Because while shows like Family Guy or Twin Peaks or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or Bob's Burgers or shit, even South Park, while all of these shows have varying levels of quality in how they reflect a sympathetic and well-written ideation of a trans person, sometimes it being intentionally bad or toxic, looking at mostly South Park and sometimes Family Guy, which is part of the stylistic comedy of the show, so I don't really want to get too much into whether that is or isn't good comedy or a good way of incorporating minorities and current political issues into popular culture. Even in all of those cases, there are still positive moments that can be found, or things that you can improve upon by seeing what they do wrong. There are lessons and experiences and the chance for development by failing to do it right the first time. None of these shows get it 100% perfect, and sometimes it took them multiple attempts with the trans characters to get to a watchable and palatable level for the trans people in the audience. But the initial leap of including a trans person at all opened the door for the possibility of discussing, of criticizing, of analysing what could be done better. Whether the creators listened or not, they gave themselves and their audience the opportunity to grow through practice. The Simpsons negates this entirely by not even attempting to do such a thing in the first place. I also, as I mentioned earlier on, fully accept that right now it's possible that people in the future might be watching a trans Simpsons episode, and so take all of this as an up to this point they haven't bothered getting into something that was kind of late 5 or 6 years ago. While yes, it isn't great to see trans representation that is bad, or that comes off as transphobic, I would much rather have that and the discussion it opens than trans gags that are also transphobic but completely avoid trying to commit to the risk of failure. Simpsons feels like it's trying to avoid screwing up by throwing trans people into blink and you'll miss it situations, to the degree that I watched all of these episodes long ago and completely forgot that trans people were in them, apparently, and pretty much everyone I talked to was in the same place. To put it simply, failing and learning is better than never trying at all, but still making weird jabs at it. And the smart thing to do for any current shows is to learn from all the other shows that came before, from the failures of all the pieces of popular culture that I mentioned, because The Simpsons is still going. It can use those blueprints to reduce its own chance of failure. Look, I get it, you want the big, serious conclusion here, you want the one you can just take home, you're like, oh, cool, that's the answer. The answer then is that it's insane that The Simpsons had a cryptocurrency episode before it had a trans episode. That's how low we rank, I guess, in including us. It's not like trans people are the big talked about thing right now in a whole bunch of often negative ways. Like, it could do a lot culturally speaking for a show like The Simpsons to have a positive role model of transness, especially to counter all the less than appealing ones they've had so far. Like, come on guys, you're The Simpsons. You're meant to be, the defining representation of American life. Trans people are a part of that. Give us a fucking episode. And, on that note, I want to thank Matt Groening and the Disney executives who watched this video for getting all the way through. Please consider this as my personal letter to you to prove why you should hire me to write this trans episode for The Simpsons. I have no experience in the business or Hollywood whatsoever, and the writing talents of a shitty YouTube video essayist, but I'm currently doing a course on screenwriting which I've managed to achieve B's in across the board, which is above average. If you are down with this, then please find me at the email on my channel or slide into DMs on Twitter. For everybody else who is watching, thanks for that, and please consider giving this a like, share, subscribe, comment, or paint yourself yellow and sit in your living room while waiting for some funny little reference to another show that probably has better trans stuff in it. If you really like what I've done here, then you can support me in a financial way by going to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi and subscribing, which is a fantastic way to ensure that I can make the content without the constraints and worries of YouTube's dodgy monetization strategy. The names of those who are currently making this possible should be flying past on the screen right now, and I can't express enough how much their funding means to me. Other than all of that, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.